Ask Brent what he put. On copy 1 or 2. Oh, I'm sorry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's Committee of Adjustment for November the 8th, 2022. This being live streamed on our YouTube channel, and if you wish to follow along for the agenda, of course, it's available on our website at greaternapanee.com. With that, I will call the meeting to order, please. A couple of moves, please, for the Committee of Adjustments. I would ask your permission to move 5.5 to follow 5.6 and 6.1 to follow 6.2. I just want to keep some continuity in the meeting, and I have to declare a conflict of interest for both those items. So with those adjustments, I would look for a motion, please, to approve. Councillor Norrie, Councillor Johnson, any comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I need to declare a conflict of interest for items 5.1 and 5.2 as the applicant is a co-worker.
Thank you. So noted. And I will be declaring a conflict of interest for 5.5 and 6.2 as they both involve a family member. Got everything you need there, Madam Clerk, and of course they're registered on our website as well. I would look, please, for a motion to adopt the minutes of the Committee of Adjustment for October the 11th, please. Moved by Councillor Richardson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Land Sembrance application 5.1. Land Sembrance application PLCOR 2021-091 McCutcheon 385 Salmon River Road. Legal description part lot 16, concession 7, Richmond. Michael.
Thank you, Worship. Staff received a request from the applicant to reconsider condition number 2 that was previously imposed on the provisional approval of the consent applications under items 5.1 and 5.2. The request was that the committee consider removing that condition in its entirety, which is the standard condition for the installation of a well on a residential property. Historically, since 2017, there's been a policy in effect where new residential lots created in excess of 5 acres did not need to have a well installed. The rationale then was that there could be challenges in siting a well where it could be located reasonably close to where a house would likely end up being located on the property, and that given a property of 5 acres, there should be somewhere on that property that you can find groundwater. At the time of the application, it was borderline. It didn't really seem like 5 acres would be the actual size of the severed lot, but upon the survey being completed, both the severed lots are just over 5 acres. So staff are bringing this back to the committee at the request of the applicant to see if the committee would like to remove that previously imposed condition, or if the committee would like to see that remain. Staff would note that although this 5-acre rule has been in place since 2017, we are aware of groundwater-related concerns in the rural area, and we're looking at policies through our official plan as we go through the update to better define when wells are required, given certain constraints, known areas of groundwater sensitivity, and the like. So this didn't trigger the need for a hydrogeological study from a density perspective. Surrounding lands aren't too overly developed, so there wasn't a requirement in that regard. But staff would look to the committee to render a decision on this matter for both items 5.1 and 5.2.
Council questions? Go ahead, please, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question in particular because the conservation authorities have been very vocal in their... What was that?
Sorry, we're trying to correct some audio problems on Zoom, and I think we're getting some feedback through Zoom participants.
Okay, we'll just hold up a minute until we make sure that we've
I can
got.
wait.
I don't think we've ever had a Zoom bomb. Okay, so we're good then? Okay. Perfect. Sorry, Councillor Johnson, I thought your voice had gone much lower.
It dropped a few octaves. Thank you, Mayor. My question was just more considering that the conservation authorities in particular have been very concerned about density throughout the watershed area, and people who already have existing buildings are concerned about losing water pressure. Do you have any concerns if this goes forward that we're going to have to take it back to the Conservation Authority for approval?
Through your worship, the Conservation Authority isn't the approval body for installation of wells. However, they do have commenting rights per se under development applications in this regard. The governing body for well installation and well interference is actually the Ministry of the Environment. So if there's a case where new wells are installed and neighboring lands are being negatively impacted, the Ministry of the Environment steps in and takes a regulatory position on the matter and may require remediation to certain wells be undertaken by the owner if there is I guess proven well interference. There's quite a process to go through to confirm if there is in fact well interference as a result of one well in particular, and the ministry goes through that performance with those individuals. It doesn't happen that often, but the ministry is the one that would get involved in this instance if there is an issue in that regard.
Mayor?
Certainly.
So from what you presented initially and from what you just said, you don't have a concern that that would be a factor on this property? Not a reasonable concern?
Correct. Not a reasonable concern.
Okay.
Staff, I mean, knowing the general area, the former Richmond Township area, there are some areas that are constrained from a groundwater perspective. So we would like to see a well installed to ensure that the lot is serviceable for residential use. That's why we would like to revisit that 5-acre rule. However, at the time of this application, we were still working on that 5-acre kind of rule of thumb, and that's where the applicant is requesting that the committee consider that in their request.
Go ahead, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Worship. So if this piece of property was to be resold without a well, could that happen? And then the onus would be on the purchaser to put a well in as opposed to the seller?
Through your worship, that is correct. If condition number 2 were to be removed, that would be the case.
And would we be setting any type of precedent with respect to that? So we may see more of these because, it boils down to dollars and cents, I guess, right? So if we allow certain things to happen, costs could be borne by the purchaser as opposed to the seller, I suppose, right?
That's correct. And, there could be a possibility where that purchaser can't find water, right? So.
Yes, and thank you. I was going to get there eventually, but yes, thank you.
Council, we're going to face the same thing in 5.1 and 5.2, so if I just might want to clarify for those that might be listening at home, when the application was put in, we did not have the 5-acre limitation.
Your worship, we did have the 5-acre rule of thumb. At the time of application, it appeared as though the lots to be created were going to be just under the 5-acre threshold, but once the survey was completed, detailed, and the surveyor performed the area calculations, they determined it's just over 5 acres.
Council's wishes on this. Because whatever you do for one, you're going to have to do for the other. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Worship. I guess my concerns are that if we're going to start creating lots without wells, it could cause us some problems in the future, and I don't think we really want to get into that. Again, when the severances happen, if we create the precedent, a 4.5 acre lot could become a 5 1/4 acre lot, all of a sudden, without the need to find water, find potable water, find good water, find the right amount of water. So I'm just a little reluctant to venture away from a proven ability that we have. So.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
So interpreting from Councillor Richardson's comments that he's not in favor of taking away the thing, I think I'm going to stand with that I'm not in favor of it either. At the time of the severance being granted, the condition was there and it was acceptable at the time. And for the sake of splitting hairs between a little under 5 acres to a little over, I don't think that's an adequate justification to change. It's kind of I don't think it's a policy, but I don't think it's one that we necessarily have to adhere to in that sense. And if it was okay then, I think we just leave it. And there's confidence there for any future buyer, any future development.
Anything? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Just for consideration too, that this property is rurally zoned. Minimum size for new residential lots in the rural zone are 2 acres. Minimum size for non-residential type uses, meaning farming type uses, are a minimum of 4 hectares or just shy of 10 acres. So staff have been sort of encouraging, the 10-acre rule more recently, to not require a well, because if you're creating a lot that's 10 acres in size, then it can be used for not solely residential purposes, but farming, agricultural uses, etc. So we're kind of leaning more towards the 10-acre rule as it relates to the rurally zoned properties. Just makes a little bit more sense from a zoning compliance standpoint as well.
Council's wishes on this.
So note and receive and deny the request.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser to note and receive, but deny the request. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Richardson. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Anything different? No, we've got another one here. Anything different that we have? Think so. On 5.2 to look at, Michael?
No, nothing different, Your Worship.
Council's wishes?
Ditto, the same resolution, sorry.
Okay, same resolution moved by Councillor Richardson to note and receive and deny.
That's correct.
Seconded by Councillor Norrie. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Five point three, land severance application, PLCON 2022-027, 102748828, Canada Inc., undeveloped lands immediately north of draft-approved Richmond Park Home subdivision, north of Cambers Ways, legal description, Part Lot 18, Concession 2, Richmond. In the last instance, I did not ask if there was anyone here speaking for or anyone here speaking against, but I don't believe there was anyone here for or against. In this instance, Michael, do we have people here speaking for or against? I believe we have someone coming in on Zoom.
Through your worship, I believe we have the property owners on Zoom, and their agent, Mr. Sean Legere, is seated behind me.
Okay.
Mr. Legere can be available for any technical questions if any come up.
Okay, I will let you go ahead then and speak to 5.3, please.
Thank you, Worship. This application seeks to essentially separate the non-draft approved portion of this property, so the non-draft subdivision approved portion of this property, so essentially the northerly half. They intend to separate that from the lands that are subject to the draft approval of this subdivision, and I believe it is really more for ownership purposes, really financial and accounting purposes more than anything. It's very much a technical consent. The lot to be created would have technically no road frontage. However, there is no essentially development potential because the lands are designated future development, meaning you need to go through a rezoning to allow any development of those lands, and they're also designated within the fringe area in the official plan, which necessitates the need for a comprehensive secondary plan to plan out the entire larger area. So it's not like when this lot is created that somebody could get a building permit to build something on this property. It really needs to go through that comprehensive process. So staff are viewing this as purely a technical consent and don't have any concerns with the proposal. One other item is when the subdivision is ultimately developed, there would be road frontage because those roads would be developed and there would be adequate access provided. But in this instance, it's very much a technical consent, and staff are supportive of the request.
Questions? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
I have two. So on that point, the plan, the draft plan of development for the southern half, there was in there basically a street allowance that would point to the north. So we have the confidence that there would be no development essentially blocking that access from the existing planned street network of the southern half to access into the north?
That is correct, yes. And there are west of that location, there will be a north-south road providing access to the greater northern portion into this to-be-severed parcel. So yeah, staff don't have any concern in that regard from an access perspective.
And a second question. Does the severing have any impact on any intended or implied green space, park space, or other that was part of the original draft plan?
Through your worship, it would not prejudice that parkland dedication in the future as part of future planning applications associated with that severed parcel. The parkland to be provided, the portion of the parkland to be provided in the southerly draft approved lands is contained within that draft approved boundary per se. And then the balance of the planned parkland to the north of the draft approved lands would be dedicated through future draft plan subdivision applications. So no, there wouldn't be any issues in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Anything else from council?
Not now.
Not now. So I see just one question here. I see that on the sketch within the lands to be severed as opposed to the lands to be retained, that there is a wetland area. Does that have anything to do with stormwater management while the construction is going on?
Through your worship, conservation authority is well aware of this application and the existence of the wetland, and there is a suitable buffer that's been accommodated for around that for the development of the lands to the south. The plan is to provide parkland surrounding that feature to, I guess, further enhance its protection ultimately at the end of the day with further development to the north.
Okay. Anything else from council? Council's wishes? Staff recommendation?
Yep.
By Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Johnson. If there are no further comments or questions, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. 5.4, land severance application, PLCON 2022. 082 Abna Investments, 88/110 Dundas Street East. Legal description, part lots 1, 2, and 8, Plan 82, Napanee. I do see that we have Mr. Dornekamp here speaking in favor. Is there anyone here speaking against? Seeing none, let the record show that Mr. Dornekamp is here in favor. Michael, go ahead with this, please.
Thank you, Worship. So the application before the committee here is essentially to separate the lands where the former Pringle building is currently located from the balance of the Gibbard District property. On the to-be severed lands, it would be very much green space, open space, as per the site plan approved for the Gibbard District. But it's you know, it's very good, viable lands within the central business district. Staff foresee good potential for an additional mixed-use type building, ground floor commercial, likely residential above, through future planning applications. I don't believe the proponents have anything in mind at the moment. Nothing that they've proposed to staff anyway. Staff are supportive of the proposal, subject to the conditions noted. One item that we did note was the Pringle building is proposed to remain as was outlined in the applicant's planning cover letter. Through the approved site plan for the Gibbard district, that building was to be demolished, and there was a set maximum amount of commercial gross floor area to be allowed on the site as a whole. So what we're requesting the committee impose here through condition number 4 is that through the period of time from receiving provisional approval until the certificate of official is issued, the applicant demonstrates to the town that there will be zoning compliance in place. So that could take the form of either following through on the demolition of the Pringle building or applying for rezoning to amend that commercial area, parking ratios, etc. If the Pringle building is demolished, there's zoning compliance is in place, but if it's to remain, then we need to address that through a different avenue, which would take the form of a rezoning. I don't know if there's anything further that the proponent would like to add at this time, but that's what staff have for the committee at this time.
He just gave us a thumbs up, Michael, so I think that we're okay. Questions or comments directed to Michael on this application? You do have a recommendation before you. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick comment. I do recall reading in either in the report or in the application that the severance of this piece of land will not close down the access along the river to allow for a walking trail, and I was very appreciative of that consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, I can confirm those easements are registered on title to the lands in favor of the municipality, so those would go forward with this severed parcel as well.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Pennell. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion. Motion is carried. Thank you. We will skip 5.5 and go on to 5.6, and then you will come back to 5.5 after I leave the room. I think I've got all those numbers right. Land severance, so 5.6, land severance application, PLCOR 2022-084, M. Punchard, 10665 Loyalist Parkway. Legal description, part lot 26, concession 1, Adolphustown. Michael.
Thank you, Worship. A portion, or I guess a component of this application is also going to come before council in a matter of moments as it relates to a proposed road closure to facilitate this right-of-way to be established. The intention here is for the separation of there's an existing dwelling on the property, and the applicant intends to separate that from the balance of the agricultural lands. Now, these lands are prime agriculturally designated and prime agriculturally zoned, so this would not take the form of a new lot creation because there actually exists quite an old village plan on the property, which takes the form of many small parcels and road allowances. Staff would not like to see that developed in the prime agricultural area. We'd like to see it retained for agricultural purposes. So there will be a need for a deeming bylaw to no longer, to essentially deem those lots to no longer be lots on a plan of subdivision, which will help to merge the property back essentially into one parcel. But there's a stepwise process that needs to occur so that the residential lands don't become absorbed into that greater agricultural parcel. So we're working with the applicant to administer that. So with that, I'd be open to taking any questions, but really the purpose of this application is to establish a right-of-way to provide access to the retained residential lands and the balance of the agricultural lands, which would be separated per se. So it's very confusing with the old village plan and many lots being in place, but I hope I was able to convey what the intention here is.
I think anybody would just have to look at the survey and all the marks on it to know that it's just a little bit complicated. I did not ask if there was anyone here speaking for or against. Sorry, and your name, please?
Karen Dacca.
Okay, Karen Dacca, got that. Thank you. Sorry, I meant to ask it first, but slipped. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor McCormack.
Staff recommendation, please.
Move staff recommendation. Do I have a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Any conversation or further questions on it? Go ahead, Councillor Richardson.
Just briefly, Your Worship, I always find it interesting when we're starting to talk about things that happened back in the early 1900s. How 100 and some years later, we're still dealing with it. So just very interesting, that's all.
I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll have you take the chair for the next two items, remembering that there is a skip over 6.1.
So I'm doing 5, 6, and 6, 2, and you're coming back for 6, 1.
Yes, oh, sorry, we need this one.
Take a look. Oh, jeepers, I almost filled that. All right, on the agenda, item 5.5. It's a long ways up there. Lot addition application PLLA 2022083 1966780 Ontario Inc. 380 Camden Road. Is there anyone here speaking for? Anyone here speaking against? Seeing none. Michael, do you want to lead us through that one, please?
Sure. Through your worship, the proposal here is to essentially add quite a sizable piece of property from one abutting residential parcel to another vacant parcel that's designated and zoned for future residential use. The land was previously subject to a plan of subdivision approval, which subsequently lapsed. However, the property owner is looking to further increase the developability in the envelope of development on this parcel by adding additional lands to it. They currently own both parcels. They own 380 Camden Road and then the abutting vacant land to the south. And staff don't have a concern with the proposal. We see it as a logical proposal in the sense that the larger parcel to be developed at a future date would have more flexibility for laying out a subdivision or et cetera. It would provide a lot of flexibility to the proponent in that regard. And the retained lands would continue to comply with all relevant zoning bylaw provisions after such lot addition is completed. So I'd be open to taking any questions that the committee might have.
Council, any questions? Terry, or Councillor Richardson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly, I see it is a fairly sizable piece of property. Does it affect, as far as the developmental of that big chunk with respect to stormwater, does that affect that at all, or will it, or could it, or should it, or just respect to the stormwater, that's all?
Yeah, thank you. To Councillor Richardson, yes, it would. So the lands being added to this larger parcel would fall within the envelope of the lands to be developed ultimately, which means that the stormwater flows that are leaving this undeveloped portion of the property now would need to be essentially equal to that amount and treated post-development. So there would, there might need to be, if this lot addition were not to go forward, for example, the stormwater management facility on the larger parcel to the south may not need to be as large, right? So you're not treating as much stormwater. But in this case, if the lot addition were to proceed, it would increase the envelope of development on that parcel, and likely there would need to be additional stormwater controls put in place to, I guess, safeguard downstream lands, et cetera, from additional flows.
And just briefly, and that can be dealt with at the time of development then?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything further from council? I notice on the to be severed portion, there's a building. Is that a consideration that we need to address, or that you will be watching?
Condition number 7 as proposed addresses that and requires the demolition of the building. The proponent is looking to demolish it anyway. We just would like to see it imposed as a condition to ensure that it is demolished.
Okay, I was just drawing attention to that. And so, council's wishes, motion to staff rec.
Staff recommendation.
Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor McCormack. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Moving to 6.2, minor variance application PLVAR 2022-0081, 1654-1652435 Ontario Inc., Derry Avenue. Michael, do you want to lead us through that one?
Sure. The proposal before the committee here is to, this was actually deferred from the last meeting, pending further comment from CN as it related to the requested rear yard setback, so which would have allowed for the buildings to be located closer to the CN right of way. CN would like to see that maximized as much as possible, so meeting our typical rear yard setback. So the proponent has gone back to the drawing board and re-laid out the buildings on the property, and essentially they lose a little bit of a couple of buildings, 1 or 2 buildings, I believe, from what they had previously looked for approval for. But in this case, it's a very shallow parcel. There's really not a lot of room to begin with, and imposing that 15-meter required setback from the CN right-of-way really pushes these buildings towards the front lot line. But from an access perspective, there's good access in behind the buildings, and it would comply with building code requirements, upon the development of these contemplated storage units. So staff don't have a concern. It's really making good use of a possibly underutilized parcel today by being able to develop it.
Okay, is anyone here speaking for this or anyone against? Seeing none, council, do you have any questions? Councillor Richardson?
Yeah, just briefly, Your Worship, thank you. And I think I know the answer to the question, Michael, is that CN isn't going to allow any kind of infringement on their 15 meters as opposed to the infringement on ours closer to the road? I'm thinking they probably won't, or have they been asked?
This is a typical requirement of CN, and they would have the right to appeal if we allowed for that encroachment that they're asking us not to encroach on. Essentially, yeah. They've voiced that. We've seen this before from CN. They were actually wanting to see a safety berm installed, which would really limit any development potential, because it would need to be so wide and tall. But after further conversation with CN and letting them know that these are not buildings that are going to be occupied, they're for self-storage, they pulled back on that requirement. So they give a little bit of flexibility in that regard, but they're still holding strong on the 15-meter setback requirement, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good question. Anything else? Councillor Johnson?
Quickly, thank you. I really like the new layout. Is there any way that as they move forward with this development that we can ask to have some trees included in the lot somewhere?
Certainly, this would need to go through site plan approval, so that's something that staff would be looking to request, is trying to beautify the property as much as possible. It's pretty barren right now, and prettying it up with some plantings would certainly go a long way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Council, you make the staff recommendation?
Yes, please.
Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor McCormack. Anything further? Seeing none, all in favor? And carried. And all good.
Thank you. 6.1, minor variance application PLVAR 2022-071, SBLP Napanee 89 Jim Kimmett Boulevard. Legal description, part lots 20 and 21, concession 3, South Richmond. Do we have anyone here speaking for? Anyone here speaking against? Let the record show that there is no one here speaking for or against. Michael, please go ahead on this one.
Thank you, Worship. This application comes to us from Walmart. SBLP Napanee is, Walmart is owned by that corporation.
Yeah.
There's an existing fair-sized sign that's on the north limit of the property that's essentially abutting the Highway 401 corridor. The proponents were not aware that they needed a sign permit at the time of installation. They just went ahead and installed the sign. And evidently it well exceeds the existing sign bylaw limits with regards to ground sign face area. Those provisions really are for your typical ground signs that are, you know, right adjacent our municipal and county roads to ensure that, you know, nothing is too drastically large. In this case, it's right abutting the 401. I've seen these styles and sizes of signs on these commercial properties up and down the 401 corridor. It's fairly commonplace to see this. MTO doesn't have a concern, so in order to allow for issuance of a sign permit to legalize the existence of the sign, a minor variance around the size would be required. Now, this would be a minor variance around the sign bylaw requirements, not around the zoning bylaws. So this is not a planning act matter, but the Committee of Adjustment is delegated the, I guess, the approval authority in this instance for sign variations. So with that, I'd take any questions that the committee might have.
Any questions from council? Councillor Pennell?
Through your worship, thank you, Michael. So keeping that in mind, is that just going to be site-specific? Okay.
Through your worship, that's the intention. Staff don't see a need to increase the size permissions for typical ground signs elsewhere in the municipality. This would be very few and far between that we would see these kind of requests come forward, and typically they'd be along the 401 corridor where, you know, we have a lot of vehicular traffic traveling at high speeds. Larger signs are needed in that instance. So yeah, this would be very much a site-specific permission.
Great, thank you.
Anything else from council? Seeing none, you have a recommendation before you. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, moving staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Norrie. Any further comments or questions on the minor variance? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on now to 6.3, minor variance application, PLVAR 2022-085. Jacobson, 233 Bridge Street West, legal description, lot 47, plan 82, Napanee. Is there anyone here speaking for? Let the record show that Mrs. Jacobson is here speaking for. Is that's the right name you wish to have on?
Kathy Kent.
Okay, just wanted to check. Thank you, Kathy. Anyone here speaking against? Let the record show that Kathy Kent is speaking for. No one is here speaking against. Michael.
Thank you, Worship. The proposal here before the committee for minor variance is around rear yard setback in the residential type 4 zone. What the proposal here is to, there's an existing detached garage that is located very close to that northerly property line. The intention of the applicant is to demolish that and construct an attached garage attached to the house on the property. However, by attaching the garage to the dwelling, it forms part of the principal building on the property, which needs to comply with the greater rear yard setback, so meaning the typical house setback. It doesn't get the benefit of the accessory building provisions whereby a reduced setback of 1.2 meters would be permitted, in this case for a detached accessory structure. So it's very much a formality. It's actually moving that garage further away ultimately than what's already in existence. So staff are certainly supportive of the proposal for this minor variance request.
Any questions of Michael on this minor variance? Seeing none, you do have move staff recommendation or a question?
Just a quick question, if I may, Your Worship. It's a fairly large garage. Is it going to be used for any type of commercial business, or is it just simply a garage like I would build and fill it full of stuff?
Through your worship, I think it's the latter, but I'll let the proponent clarify if they would like.
My husband just has a lot of toys. We need to store them.
So,
a man after my own heart.
so that'd be like you, stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? I need someone to move the staff recommendation if that's a wish. Counselor Johnson, Deputy Mayor Kaiser, all in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. That brings us to motion for adjournment. Moved by Counselor McCormack, seconded by Counselor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. We will resume in as quickly as we can to go into the regular session of council.